Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're stepping right into the classroom to map out the spectacular rise, the golden peak, and the absolute collapse of the Lodi Dynasty. We are looking at a really fascinating 75-year stretch of history that completely bridged the medieval Delhi Sultanate and the early modern Mughal age. So let's dive into the central question. How exactly does a single family transition from the rugged frontier to the absolute center of power in the Delhi Sultanate? It's a story that actually starts with a man named Malik Bahram Lodi. He was a Pashtun horse trader, and his family would eventually climb the military ranks to claim the very throne of Delhi. Here is our historical timeline for today. We'll hit the rise of the Afghan Empire, Bahlul's tribal confederacy, Sikandar Lodi's golden age, Ibrahim's fatal iron fist, the Battle of Panipat, and finally, the legacy of the Lodis. Section 1. Rise of the Afghan Empire. To really grasp how the Lodis snatched power, you've got to look at the massive power vacuum created by the failing Sayyid Dynasty in northern India. Bahlul Lodi was incredibly patient. He leveraged his military utility and his trading background to gradually take over. He didn't just smash his way in. Tracing his steps on our timeline here, after an unsuccessful attack on Delhi in 1443, he just bided his time. By 1451, his influence was so undeniable that the last Sayyid ruler literally voluntarily abdicated. This allowed Bahlul to peacefully ascend the throne and establish the very first Afghan empire in India. Section 2. Bahlul's Tribal Confederacy. All right, so Bahlul is in power, but now he has a huge problem, managing his fiercely independent Afghan commanders. These are guys who were definitely not used to bowing down to a supreme king. So he didn't rule as a god king. Instead, he built what historians call a confederate state to balance the massive egos of tribes like the Lahanis, Farmulis, and Sarwanis. He knew for a fact that traditional autocracy simply wouldn't fly with his nobles. This is where Bahlul was kind of genius. He completely ditched the whole sultan as the elevated shadow of God routine. Instead, he sat right on the floor on a carpet as the first among equals. By doing this, he won their absolute loyalty. He leaned so heavily into tribal kinship that if a noble was upset, Bahlul would literally go to their house and offer them his own sword to strike him if they felt he was unworthy. I mean, it was an absolute masterclass in psychological management. And to keep the peace and really structure the economy, he leaned on the Ikta system. He was essentially paying his commanders in vast estates of land. These nobles got to run their own local revenue systems and keep small armies, giving them the exact autonomy they craved, while still locking in their military loyalty for the broader empire. Section 3. Sikandar Lodi's Golden Age. When Bahlul died in 1489, his son Sikandar took the reins, and this is where we hit the dynasty's absolute peak. Sikandar was a real architect of power. In 1504, he strategically shifted the capital to a brand new city called Agra. Why? To keep a much tighter grip on the rebellious Rajputana regions and completely dominate the vital trade routes of the Dab, that incredibly fertile stretch of land between the Ganges and Yamuna rivers. Now, if you're taking notes for this classroom deep dive, put a giant star next to the Gazz-i-Sikandari. This was a 32-digit measuring unit and an absolute game changer for economic reform. By standardizing land measurement, Sikandar wiped out a ton of land disputes, protected peasant farmers from corrupt tax collectors, and totally stabilized the empire's revenue stream. But here's the thing about Sikandar. He was a walking paradox. On one hand, he was a strict Orthodox ruler who harshly oppressed his Hindu subjects. He imposed the jizya, which was a specific tax on non-Muslims, and even destroyed temples in places like Mathura. But at the exact same time, he abolished corn duties to stimulate the economy, sponsored massive cross-cultural translations like Sanskrit medical texts into Persian, and even wrote his own poetry under the pen name Gluruki. He was an incredibly complex guy. Section 4. Ibrahim's fatal iron fist. So Sikandar's prosperity? Yeah, that didn't last. Because in 1517, Ibrahim Lodi took over. And let's just say he entirely missed his grandfather Bahlul's memo on diplomacy. Ibrahim demanded royal absolutism. He forced those same incredibly proud Afghan nobles to stand silently in his presence with their hands folded. He even went so far as to arrest and imprison highly respected figures like Mian Bua, who actually died in captivity. By crushing that tribal pride, Ibrahim completely destroyed internal loyalty. So what does this all mean? How does a booming empire just collapse in a single day? Well, because of this deep hatred for Ibrahim, powerful governors decided they had to act. Bahlul Khan Lodi, the governor of Punjab, and even Ibrahim's own uncle, Alam Khan, literally invited foreign intervention. They reached out to Babur, the Timurid ruler of Kabul, setting the stage for a totally catastrophic showdown. Section 5. The Battle of Panipat. Which brings us to April 21, 1526. This is one of the most decisive dates in all of Indian history. Just look at these numbers for a second. You would naturally assume Ibrahim's massive army of 100,000 men and 1,000 war elephants would easily crush the invader Babur, who only brought 24,000 troops. On paper, it looks like a completely guaranteed victory for the Sultan. But here's where history pivots. Ibrahim's old-school tactics were absolutely no match for Babur's revolutionary approach to warfare. Babur brought advanced gunpowder firearms and devastating field cannons to the Indian subcontinent. The sheer noise and impact of that artillery completely terrified Ibrahim's elephants, causing them to panic and trample their own men. The result was absolute devastation. Sultan Ibrahim Lodi died right there on the battlefield, alongside 20,000 of his soldiers. Section 6. Legacy of the Lotus. The First Battle of Panipat violently ended the Delhi Sultanate. But as we wrap up our timeline, we have to recognize that the Lodis left a massive, permanent footprint on India. Their architectural and administrative brilliance literally became the blueprint that the Mughals would later build on. They permanently shifted the geographic center of power to Agra. They established the Bahlul coin standard, which lasted all the way through Akbar's reign. And structurally, monuments like the Bara Gumbad in Lodi Gardens pioneered the double dome and garden tomb architecture. That's the exact same style that would eventually inspire world wonders like the Taj Mahal. Here is your main takeaway from today's explainer. Ibrahim's tragic hubris shattered a highly functional, unified tribal confederacy. By tearing his own state apart from the inside, he inadvertently opened the front door and practically handed India to Babur. Which leaves us with this final, kind of mind-blowing thought for our history lesson. Without the economic, geographic, and architectural foundations laid by the Lodis, would the majestic Mughal empire even exist today? Sometimes the absolute greatest legacy of a fallen dynasty is the incredible empire they accidentally helped create. Thanks for joining me to explore the Lodi Dynasty. Keep analyzing these layers of history, and I'll see you in the next explainer.